The sun sank low behind the red cliffs of the Arizona desert, and the air turned gold with dust and silence. A cowboy named Luke Ransom rode his old horse through the heat, searching for a herd of cattle that had wandered too far from his ranch. He had been born in these lands, raised among dust storms and wild rivers. Life had made him strong and quiet, a man who spoke little but worked harder than anyone around. His ranch was small but steady, and he lived alone since his father died 2 winters ago. That evening, as he rode deeper into Apache territory, he noticed tracks in the sand. Large, wide footprints that seemed impossible for any normal human. He dismounted, crouched, and touched one. It was longer than his entire hand. The print was deep and clear, as if someone heavy had stepped there. He followed the trail through the rocky pass until he saw smoke rising from a distant ridge. Curious and cautious, Luke led his horse closer. There, standing by a fire, was a woman unlike any he had ever seen. She was tall, towering really, her height near 8 feet, her skin the warm bronze of the desert, her hair black as midnight falling down her back. Her eyes caught the fading sunlight, sharp and fearless. Around her neck hung tribal beads and a small carved charm shaped like an eagle's claw. She looked like something from the old stories the elders whispered about, the last of the giant Apaches who once roamed the high plateaus. Guarding the land before the settlers came, Luke stood still, his heart pounding, half afraid and half amazed. She turned to him slowly, her hand resting on a long wooden spear. "You lost, cowboy?" she asked, her voice deep but calm. He raised his hand slightly, showing he meant no harm. "Just looking for my cattle, ma'am," he said. "Didn't mean to trespass." She laughed softly, a sound that echoed through the rocks. "Your cattle don't belong here. This is sacred ground. You should not ride so far from your home." "I'll leave once I find them," Luke replied. "Didn't mean disrespect." Her eyes narrowed, but there was curiosity in them. "You're brave to stand and talk to me," she said. "Most men run when they see me." Luke gave a faint smile. "You don't seem like the running type either." That made her laugh again, a rich, strong laugh that filled the air. She lowered her spear slightly. "I am Taya," she said. "Daughter of the mountain, last of my mother's line." "And you, cowboy?" "Luke Ransom," he said simply. Taya studied him. His clothes were torn, his face sunburned, his eyes steady. She saw no fear in him, only tired honesty. It was strange to her. Men from the towns usually feared or mocked her size. But this one looked at her like she was a person, not a story. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of coming rain. Luke's horse snorted and pawed the ground. "Storm's coming," Taya said. "You won't make it back before nightfall." "I've ridden through worse," Luke replied. She tilted her head, then turned toward the fire. "Foolish cowboy," she murmured. "If you stay out there, you'll drown in the flood valley. Bring your horse. Stay here until the storm passes." He hesitated, unsure if he should trust her, but the thunder in the distance decided for him. He led his horse closer, tying it to a rock, and sat near the fire. The flames flickered on Taya's face, revealing faint scars across her shoulders and arms, marks of old battles or survival. She moved with quiet grace, her height giving her a commanding presence. They sat in silence for a long while. The storm rolled over the desert and rain began to fall in silver sheets. Taya handed him a piece of roasted rabbit from the fire. "Eat," she said. "You look hungry." He accepted it, grateful. "You live out here alone?" he asked. She nodded. "My people are gone. I stay to guard their graves, to keep the land from being stolen again." Luke's eyes softened. "I understand. I lost my folks too. This land doesn't forgive easy." For the first time, she looked at him not as an intruder, but as someone who carried pain of his own. The storm raged louder, lightning cutting across the sky. They watched it together in silence, 2 lonely souls who had both learned to live with emptiness. After a long while, Taya spoke again. "You men from the ranches," she said, almost teasing. "You talk big about taking Apache women for wives or breeding with them for strong children. I've heard your jokes carried by the wind." Luke frowned. "Not me. I don't talk like that." She smiled faintly, testing him. "Would you take an Apache woman?" He met her gaze without flinching. "I'd take a woman if she had a good heart," he said. "Doesn't matter where she's from." She laughed again, shaking her head. "You say that now, cowboy, but look at me. You think any man could stand beside me without feeling small?" Luke looked up at her. Even sitting down, she was tall enough to make him tilt his head. "You're strong, that's all. Strength's not something to be ashamed of. Her laughter faded slowly. She had heard many words from settlers: mockery, fear, cruel admiration, but never calm respect. Something about his tone made her chest tighten. The storm went on until midnight. The fire burned low and they shared stories. Luke told her about his ranch, about the cattle and the loneliness of the plains. Taya spoke of her mother, who had taught her to hunt, to fight, to survive when others fell. When the rain stopped, the desert smelled clean, new. The stars came out like silver dust. Luke rose to leave. "Thank you for the shelter," he said. "Didn't expect kindness from someone who could crush me with one hand." Taya smiled. "I could," she said, "but I don't harm those who respect the land." He nodded, tightening the saddle on his horse. "Then I'll remember that." As he turned to go, she called out, "Cowboy, one question before you vanish." He looked back. "You really think a man and woman from two worlds so different could ever live side by side?" He thought for a moment. "If they listen more than they talk," he said. "If they care more than they fear." Taya stared at him as he rode away into the dawn, his figure fading between the wet rocks. She felt something strange stir in her heart, a quiet ache she had not known for years. Days passed. The storm had changed the land, and so had that meeting. Luke found himself returning to the ridge more than once, bringing small gifts: dried meat, a canteen, sometimes flowers from the riverbank. At first, Taya mocked him, calling him foolish for climbing the cliffs again and again. But she never turned him away. Each time they met, the distance between them grew smaller. He fixed her fire pit. She helped him find lost cattle. Sometimes they sat in silence, watching the sunset turn the sky to gold. Sometimes she told him old stories of her people, tales of warriors, spirits, and stars. One evening, when she laughed at something he said, her voice carried softer than before. He looked at her and she caught his gaze. The desert was quiet. For the first time, the giant woman who once laughed at the thought of being close to any man felt her heart beating faster. And though neither spoke of it aloud, something had begun that no storm could wash away. Weeks passed like drifting clouds across the desert sky. The strange friendship between Luke and Taya became something more than either of them had planned. Every few days he would ride out with food, tools, or stories from the town. At first, Taya met him with teasing words and distant smiles. But soon her laughter carried warmth instead of mockery. She began to wait for the sound of his horse approaching over the ridge. Luke built a small shelter near her cave so the storms wouldn't catch him on his rides. He said it was just for safety, but they both knew it meant he didn't want to stay away too long. They shared quiet evenings by the fire, trading stories of the world before both their people had been scattered. Taya told him about her ancestors who stood as tall as mountains and lived by the code of the hawk and wolf. Luke spoke of his father, who taught him that a man's worth was in his heart, not his words. One night as they sat by the flames, Taya looked at the stars and said softly, "The sky remembers everything, even the footsteps of those who are gone." Luke nodded. "Maybe that's why I keep coming back here. Feels like this place remembers something I lost." She turned her eyes toward him. "And what is that?" He smiled faintly. "Peace, I guess. Maybe even a reason to stay." Something changed between them in that quiet moment. They didn't speak of love, but it was there, silent and strong like the wind moving through the canyon. She began to trust him, and he began to see her not as a legend but as a woman with a soul deeper than the desert sky. Days turned to months. Luke's ranch started to grow because of her help. Taya showed him hidden springs where his cattle could drink and taught him how to read the wind before a storm. She hunted with him and laughed when he missed his shot. When the ranchers in town asked him where he kept disappearing to, he only smiled and said, "Somewhere worth the dust." One evening, after a long ride, Luke found her sitting near the fire with a look of quiet thought on her face. "You've been distant," he said gently. "Something wrong?" Taya hesitated before speaking. "The wind has been strange lately," she said, "and my heart feels heavy. I think my mother's spirit is trying to tell me something." Luke knelt beside her. "You've got nothing to fear. You're stronger than any storm." She gave him a small smile. "You think strength means no fear. It doesn't. It means standing even when your knees shake." He looked into her eyes and saw both strength and sorrow. In that moment, he realized how deeply she carried the memory of her people, the loneliness of being the last. He reached for her hand and she didn't pull away. The days grew warmer and spring brought color to the desert again. But Taya began to feel tired. Her steps slowed and she often rested by the fire. Luke worried, bringing her herbs and food, but she only smiled and said, "The spirits are working within me." It took him time to understand what she meant. One morning when he brought water from the river, she stood waiting for him, her eyes softer than ever before. "Luke," she said quietly, "I carry life." He froze, the jug slipping slightly in his hand. "Life?" he repeated, his voice unsure. She placed his hand gently on her stomach. "A child. Your child, Cowboy." Luke's heart pounded. For a long moment he couldn't speak. The world seemed too still. Then slowly he smiled, disbelief mixing with wonder. "You mean, we're going to have a baby?" Taya nodded. "It seems the spirits have a sense of humor." The woman who laughed at the idea of being with a cowboy now carries his blood. Luke looked at her with awe. "Taya, that's a miracle." She laughed softly, her eyes glistening. "Maybe, or maybe it's what was meant to be." From that day, Luke stayed close. He built her a proper home beside the ridge using wood and stone. He brought blankets, food, and everything she might need. Though she was strong, he treated her with gentle care, never letting her lift heavy things, always watching for signs of weariness. She often teased him for worrying too much, but her laughter carried warmth. As her belly grew, word spread through nearby towns. Some cowboys whispered wild tales about the giant Apache woman and the man who tamed her. Others laughed cruelly, calling Luke a fool for claiming her. But he never cared. When asked, he only said, "She's my world. Let them laugh if they want." Taya faced her own doubts. Sometimes she stood alone under the moon, wondering what kind of life her child would have. Half Apache, half settler, born in a land that belonged to neither side. But when she thought of Luke, her fears softened. She remembered the way he looked at her, not as something strange, but as something precious. One evening, a group of ranchers came to Luke's land, their faces dark with anger. "You're bringing trouble," one of them said. "That woman doesn't belong here. Folks say she's cursed. You should send her away." Luke stood tall, his voice calm but firm. "You can say what you want. She stays." Taya appeared behind him, silent and proud, her height shadowing the men. None dared meet her eyes for long. She said only one thing: "This land remembers my people. It will remember my child too." The ranchers left without another word. Luke turned to her and said softly, "Guess that's settled." She smiled faintly. "You stand like a warrior, Cowboy. Maybe you have Apache blood after all." As the months passed, the bond between them deepened. Luke's ranch flourished with her wisdom, and she found peace in his steady heart. Sometimes when the evening wind swept across the plains, she would place his hand over her growing stomach and whisper, "He kicks strong like you." When the day finally came, the desert was wrapped in storm again, just like the night they first met. The wind howled and rain struck the earth. Luke stayed by her side, keeping the fire alive while Taya fought through the long hours. Her strength was incredible, her spirit unbroken. At last, when dawn touched the horizon, the cries of a newborn filled the small home. Taya held the child close, her eyes glowing with tears. Luke sat beside her, his hands shaking as he looked at the tiny life that was both of them. "He's beautiful," Luke whispered. "He's got your eyes," Taya smiled, tired but radiant. "And your stubborn spirit." The baby's small fingers curled around her own, and for a moment all the storms of the world seemed to fade away. The desert outside shimmered with new light. In the weeks that followed, people from nearby towns began to change their tone. Some came to see the child out of curiosity. Many left with quiet awe. There was something about that baby, half human, half Apache, that felt like a bridge between two worlds. Luke built a stone circle on the hill, marking it as sacred ground. Taya placed her family's eagle charm around her child's neck and said softly, "He will walk under two suns, the one of your world and the one of mine." Luke wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Then maybe he'll teach both sides what it means to live in peace." Years later, when travelers passed through that part of the desert, they spoke of a ranch where an 8-foot Apache woman lived with her cowboy husband and their strong, kind-hearted son. They said the woman still laughed when she heard people talk about fear or difference. She once laughed at the idea of being with a cowboy, they would say, smiling. But the spirits laughed louder. Now look, she gave the desert a new story. And every evening as the sun sank behind the red cliffs, Taya would stand outside her home, her child in her arms, watching the horizon. She would remember that day long ago when a dusty cowboy rode into her life, unafraid of her shadow. She would smile, feeling the wind against her face, and whisper to the earth, "This was meant to be." The desert would echo her laughter, soft, endless, alive.